Thank you for joining us. This is Paul Wilson.
And Chris Emke.
You're listening to the Diesel Performance Podcast. Guys, real quick, right off the top here, we are brought to you by Duramax Tuner, who is homed, at Calibrated Power. Chris and I have worked there forever. We love working there. God, we're coming up on quite a few years now.
Yeah, we're seasoned vets here at this point in time.
Chris, we just got through the Black Friday, Cyber Monday sale. That was just this past week. It went crazy. It went really well. Guys, thank you so much. So many podcast fans called in. Yep. They got their hands on some products that they've been waiting for. They took advantage of the deals. If you missed out on the deal, give us a call. Give Chris a call specifically. They can reach you at
815-568-7920, extension 2121, or by email. So cemke@duramaxtuner.com, which is CEHMKE. So, feel free to reach out, guys. I'll do what I can to help. I've been getting a lot of responses recently, or inquiries, if you will.
Absolutely.
From listeners. Some stuff I have no support for or no knowledge on. Some stuff I do. So feel free, shoot me a message or an email. I will say, if you guys call in, say, hey, I listen to you on the podcast, like that, because otherwise you just start going and talking. I don't know what the hell's going on. And I deal with a lot of stuff in a day-to-day. So
do you ever get halfway through a conversation and then they reference something personal, like your car or something like that? And you're like, oh, yeah.
Well, it's like
thinking, did I say that?
And it gets, because I get standoffish at one point because it's like they're going and I'm trying to get a little information because I want to know what the fuck they're talking about. And then now I'm getting irritated, and then they say something personal. I'm like, oh, fuck. So, guys, like I said, I really appreciate it. It's the listeners. It's what you guys do for us that allows us to do what we do for you. So it goes both ways there.
Absolutely.
So if you guys have questions or whatever and you want to reach out, that's fine. The one thing I really don't check on is like my Instagram messenger. So I went on there today. I had 12 messages that I didn't they needed to be accepted.
Right.
Whatever. And I felt bad. I'm not trying to ignore anyone, I promise. It's just I don't use Facebook Messenger. So please email. Works best.
Guys, another great way you can support the show is support our other two sponsors. WC Fab, Jason Worley is somebody we've talked about for damn near every single show we've ever done for Diesel Performance Podcast. And that's because Jason and the team are involved on damn near every single project we work on here.
Let's cut out our projects. UC, WC Fab, turbo kits, traction bars, powder coating, miscellaneous, Duramax accessories on a lot of builds that aren't just internal here, but nationwide. And I think the same is going to go for Exergy Performance.
Absolutely correct.
So,
and another big shout out to Exergy specifically for helping out on today's episode. Now, you guys have already downloaded it. We are talking about how common rail diesel injection works. And we're going to get into the injectors. We're going to get into kind of the general system. And one of the people who actually helped us out for this, one of our references, our resources for today, was fact-checking by Randy Harkema, CEO, owner of Exergy Performance. So huge shout out to Randy. You really made this episode happen. And this is one, Chris, I'm excited for.
I'm excited for it. And I think, just for the guys that, aren't behind the scenes, you shot Randy and I, right? A carbon copy or whatever. You copied me in on it, CC'd me on it, an email at 4:30 in the afternoon. And Randy had everything broken down the next day in a very understanding, detailed description within a day. Now, granted, we do business to business, things like that. So they're like, oh, you have a connection. No, it's not, because it is, but at the same time, end users and myself as a sales guy, I can reach out to them and get an answer. Yeah. They've never left me stranded, so it just goes to show the proof of character on who they are and how they operate. And there's they are a brand. Honestly, you put it on your truck, it's going to work. That they're going to stand behind it.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. Hey, some of our other resources here, Chris. I found an amazing video that explains how common rail diesel injectors work. Yeah. It's by Engineer Diesel. It's on their YouTube channel. You guys have probably all already seen it because it has 1.25 million views on it. It is extremely simple, extremely basic, kind of like cartoon graphic, but very diagram, very easy to understand. I've worked around diesel injection for almost 10 years now. Yeah. Chris, we've been around it forever. I'm telling you, we've talked about injectors, but injectors are like one of those, I feel like, kind of magical components where you're like, yeah, the CP3 sends fuel to the injectors, and then the computer controls the injectors, and it puts fuel in the engine.
Right.
And that's about as much as I ever really needed to know. What we're going to do today is break this down a little bit more. And if you're looking for that visual aspect and you just want a quick, extremely simple, extremely accurate way of describing it all, jump on their YouTube channel because Engineer Diesel put out just a phenomenal video with that.
Cool.
We also used other places like doityourself.com.
We used How Stuff Works.
Of course, Driving Line Magazine, great place.
And then dieselhub.com, which we've used in a couple of prior episodes as resources are concerned. So guys, check that stuff out. There's a lot of knowledge to be had in those websites.
That's right. I don't think I've actually told you. I think we're going to get one of the guys from dieselhub.com on the show.
Oh, that'd be really cool.
Yeah. So I think somebody talking from one of our resources, I know I'm very interested to see that happen.
Our listeners here find out about this. I find out about it at the same time. So it's pretty neat.
This is how we plan.
So let's dive into it, Paul. I mean, high pressure common rail injection. So just as a baseline, I would say that the Duramax was the first mainstream, light duty pickup truck to have common rail injection, which was in 2001. Ford really didn't adopt it until 2008. And Cummins or Dodge, for that matter, adopted it in 2003.
Yep, so, absolutely. We're all on it now.
Yeah, everyone's on it. It's kind of a way of life. So I'll hit the first bulletin, okay?
Do it.
Fuel is drawn from the tank either by the vacuum of a high-pressure fuel pump on the engine or pushed by a low-pressure fuel pump in or near the tank.
And we see a difference in this between the Duramax with the CP3 and the Cummins.
Yeah, so,
right?
For an example, from 2001 through 2016, if you bought a Duramax-powered truck, there was no lift pump in the tank. It was a gravity-fed system that was reliant on the CP3 or CP4 to kind of vacuum and pull fuel to the pump, and then the pump disperses it in high pressure. Where your 03 and newer Cummins, they have a pump in the tank, an electronic pump in the tank that's feeding the CP3 at a very low PSI, low fuel volume. And then the Fords, they've always had a lift pump in the tank from 2008 to current. So
yeah, and I think this is interesting too because we being around Duramaxes so much, just you throw a lift pump on every Duramax, and it's a no-brainer. We use Fast, other guys use AirDog and Fuel Lab, and all the other guys out there. But we always put down for all the benefits of a lift pump, but those are external lift pumps. It's always been kind of wild to me that Duramax has had this kind of hole about like the CP3, well known throughout performance industry. Great part. It's been very reliable, modified by many different manufacturers. Of course, we prefer the Exergy. But that intake lift pump from a Cummins guy, you guys still throw lift pumps on the truck?
Yeah, I mean, then it becomes a power game, where a Duramax fuel system falls off around mid-4s, when we're talking the 01 to 2010.
Yeah.
And then around 500-ish on an 11 to 16. And then, the newer L5P platform is just a totally different animal all on its own because it actually has a lift pump in the tank.
Right.
But the Dodge crowd, I mean, you could essentially get 550, close to 600 horsepower utilizing the factory fuel system, with air upgrades and tuning. But you're going to run through fuel filters more frequently. I mean, you're taxing that fuel system and what its full capability is. So where the lift pump's really going to shine for any of those trucks, even with a lift pump in the tank already and bypassing it's going to be the fuel filtration, the water separation, and just having better accessibility to changing those filters and things like that.
And those are the added bonuses of an aftermarket lift pump. A factory lift pump's only purpose is just to consistently provide fuel to the injection pump.
And then you have that one fuel filter in the engine bay.
You got it. Yep. This really helps, or I'm sorry, the pressure of the fuel as it enters into your injection pump, so a CP3 in most cases, is small and has little to no effect on the actual pressure leaving the nozzle.
Right.
So the only time we see a variation on this is I definitely have had guys tweak their aftermarket lift pump with the springs inside, and all of a sudden they're getting 20 psi, or it's like from a Ford and they're getting like 40 psi from the tank to the lift pump, and the lift pump's not expecting to see that much coming in, and we actually end up seeing a kind of a lope, a fuel pressure lope,
what you have
where it's
there,
pushing through
the regulator of the CP3 or CP4 pump, which is very common. So, and I've seen in the past where lift pumps from the factory, AirDog, Fast, whatever, they might not necessarily be at that desired like 7 to 10 psi. It might be a psi higher or lower, or simply the pump's regulator is tired. 200,000 mile truck, you're dropping rail pressure. You say, hey, I'm gonna throw a lift pump on there and fix it. No, you're band-aiding the situation is all you're really doing. But nonetheless, we see those types of scenarios take place. So for us, where we work, it's just asking the proper question and trying to be as educated with the end user's issue as possible to help steer them in the right direction.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, man. Well, I'll jump into the next step here. Fuel enters the high-pressure fuel pump, the CP3, CP4, HP4, whatever, and is pressurized, then dispersed into the common fuel rail.
So we'll kind of, break that down a little more. So you have a single pump that fuel enters and then exits. And the pump's purpose there is to turn that pressure into a high pressure. And then it goes through a rail. Like, it's legitimately, for any of our listeners that's never seen it, a common rail is essentially a rail.
Yeah.
And it either has 6 banks or 8 banks.
Right.
And
it's one fuel line.
It's one fuel line. It's one fuel rail. And that's the way you have to put it, because it's not small like a line. It's bigger than a line. It has all these fittings on there. For the Cummins guys, you're going to have 6 ports. And for a Duramax or a Ford guy, you're going to have 8 ports, of course, because the fuel lines. And then there's fuel lines that bolt onto that rail.
Right.
Okay. So when we talk about rail pressure, we're talking about the fuel pressure that the pump has turned into a high pressure, and then the pressure that is flowing through that rail, through the fuel lines into the injector itself.
Which is equalized. So the whole idea is that what we get is we get one constant pressure on all of the injectors.
Yes.
So that now, as just in simple terms, as we open the injectors, we're always pulling from the same supply of high pressure.
Yes.
Right. So this will make more sense as we get into how injectors themselves work. I do think it's important here just to kind of break down. So the rail pressure itself is actually controlled by the M-prop or an inlet metering valve.
Sometimes more referred to as just a regulator.
Yep,
right?
yep, or rail pressure control valve. But yeah, there's a lot of names for it, but there's always that one piece there that's electronically controlled that controls exactly, like we said, how much pressure is on that common rail, and that's a very important thing to know.
Yep. So, so just got a little off there as you were talking. But like you said, just to recap, the regulator is electronically controlled through a current, if you will, and it just opens and closes, let fuel in, and then it disperses it into high pressure.
That's it.
So then, each injector is controlled by the ECM or PCM, depending on what platform you have, to deliver fuel directly into the combustion of the cylinder.
Yeah. So direct injection for anybody who's ever been from the gas world, right? Like, this was a huge deal. Common rail diesels, this is how they work. They've always worked on that direct injection, that shared common rail line.
Well, even prior to that, direct injection is just directly injecting fuel into the cylinder.
Right.
It's not like a carburetor where it sprays into a bowl, air enters, and then it disperses through the all 8 cylinders, and you pray to God that it's a healthy mix. This is getting the exact fuel into that exact cylinder.
Absolutely. Which gives us higher control. And we're going to talk about some of the benefits of this as we kind of go through it. One of the big things you'll see as we go through this, what drives diesel performance are really 2 things, and that's 3 things: fuel mileage, horsepower, EPA regulations.
These days,
well, forever. Because one of the advantages, was that back in the day there were starting rules. That's why in like 2003, as they started to introduce EGRs and things like this, you had to meet certain emissions requirements with your diesel, and that's when you went to high pressure, because high pressure fuel, what they found was it atomizes better. And as fuel atomizes better, that means we get a more clean burn out of it. Forget the EPA. Forget anything you feel about politics or climate change. If we're using the fuel more efficiently, we should be able to use less fuel to get the same horsepower. Now, the difference we've seen in miles per gallon on actual vehicles as time has gone on is they've also gotten heavier.
Well, I think
a
that's
lot heavier.
Because we'll get kickback. We're going to get flack for this.
Yeah.
Well, my 95 12 valve, listen, man, your fucking 95 12 valve weighs 6,000 pounds.
Right.
Okay. There's not a lot of components there. And honestly, those trucks are more aerodynamic.
And has a third of the torque, by the way.
A third of the torque. Well, yes, but that doesn't help us in our argument here when we talk about fuel mileage. But the weight of the truck, the drag of the truck, the aerodynamics of the vehicle, the weight, these things all come into play when we talk about efficiency.
Right.
Now, we're talking about let's talk about tow capacity. Go take a 94, 95 truck. I don't care if it's Ford,
whatever.
Duramax, Chevy, 6.5 liter or Cummins. You're not you're not comfortably towing more than 8,000 pounds with that thing, in my opinion. Not like I would with like a newer vehicle, even in factory trim. But that newer vehicle also weighs, where those trucks weigh 65 to 7. The new trucks are 85 to 9.
Right.
You know, they're fucking heavy.
We weighed an L5P this year.
And
we were over 9,000 pounds. It was insane. Yeah, I was like, this is insane.
You know, you have to consider all these different attributes. Plus, you know, there's more moving parts. There's so much more to the engines these days than prior, you know, back in the early 90s, mid 90s.
That's right. So to increase the horsepower, to maintain a certain level of mile per gallon, and then you have to go and meet the emission standards. And that's those three components really drive this industry more than anything else.
Look at the size of drive shafts and U-joints and, you know, transmission shafts.
Well, like I said, just brakes.
Just
stopping.
The brakes alone,
Just I mean, that's something we commonly overlook. I know on every build I've ever done, we ran stock brakes. I didn't care what horsepower you were
The one thing that's funny to me, you know, as we dive into an injector, okay, getting into the injector piece. Me being around Cummins all the time, you know, you look at a 12-valve injector, you look at a 24-valve injector, you look at a 24-valve injector, and then you look at a common rail injector. The injectors essentially look the same, just they have electronic controls and a couple, you know, 8mm bolts on top.
Put some wires on it. Yeah.
And that's a good segue to get into how a solenoid piezo injector base works.
Absolutely. All right, so let's do it, man. So high pressure fuel enters the injector body. Pressure then equalizes throughout the internals of the injector. So inside the injector, there's little holes that run through it. There's little channels, if you will. Well, when fuel first opens to actually go into that injector, the first thing it has to do is equalize that pressure. It has to get all that air out and get the same pressure all the way through the injector.
Okay. Then the solenoid on top of the injector is energized, controlled by PCM or ECM, which pulls the control plunger upward. So there's a plunger that seats on the injector that there's like a chamber that would go to the nozzle, and that opens and allows that pressurized equalized fuel to go into the nozzle, essentially.
That's right. Now, for LML guys, we do know that you guys had piezo injectors. A piezo electric crystal or piezo injector works a little bit different in that a piezo crystal grows with an electric potential when electrical potential is applied to it. So when it's given current, I'll say, which I know is like technically wrong, this then pushes a valve open to start the same chain of events as below as it would in a solenoid injector. So as we go forward, everything else will be the same. It's just a little bit different how it works. So the
it's powered and
the piezo crystal kind of replaces that plunger, if you will. Right.
Okay.
So from as far as I understand it.
Okay. So then the controller plunger releases a small amount of fuel into the return line. This creates the pressure differential, which allows the pintle to be off its seat, essentially.
Exactly.
Which then enters into the nozzle itself.
Yeah. So when I first thought of injectors, I thought it was as simple as when the plunger lifted, fuel shot through the end. It's not. There's a few more parts. There's a few more parts. So the pintle sits all the way down at the bottom, and that's what actually closes the nozzle of the injector. So if you will, that's the opening and closing of that nozzle. So as the return line opens, that then allows that pressure to come up. So the pintle will raise up as the return line is used, and then you're going to get fuel to spray down. And this reminds me of a question I heard a guy who was really new to diesel that asked, like, well, why do we need return lines? And like, well, the way injectors work is they're always returning a certain amount of fuel, which I just think a lot of guys that are new to diesel, the way you would just logically is like, if a 6-year-old were to explain it, they'd be like, well, the CP3 sends it to the common rail, and the common rail sends it to the injector, and the injector goes in. But that return system is also very important.
Well, you have to think about if you're running, let's say a newer LML Duramax, 29,000 PSI of pressure, that injector shuts.
Stock.
Where does the pressure go?
Right.
So there is always going to be a way for the pressure to be relieved. Another thing that, a caveat to that is, the pintle, when you see these trucks or, you hear of these 200,000, 300,000 mile trucks that are hazing, it's that pintle that is starting to wear. And it doesn't matter. I mean, it does matter because the truck's still going to be powered by that pintle opening or closing, but you get that bleed off.
Yeah.
And then that gets into the cylinder, and then that's where you get that unburnt, that haze itself.
Well, also, I think this is a good time to talk about LB7 injectors and why LB7 VCO injectors have problems and why we see them not have the same type of lifespan that we do from the rest of the Duramax lineup. And that's if you got an 01 to 04 VCO injector. They had some problems with the ball seat being really heavy, if I remember correctly. And so that heavy ball seat slams and it causes extra force, and then we see damage there, and that's where they start leaking and they start having.
And
all
there's
sorts
been
of
other
issues.
technology over the years. Exergy has some updated bodies and that mechanism, right, to better suit LB7's owner's needs. Other companies have done other things and re-engineered a sack style nozzle for those.
Sure.
I mean, I've seen really good long-term reliability. I mean, I had an LB7 with Exergy's injectors in them. I mean, I sold the truck years ago. The truck has like 150,000 on the injectors, and they're still running well.
Right.
So a lot of it has to do, in my opinion, consistency of quality fuel filter, water separator replacements, lift pump, things like that. But it all comes together as one.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Okay, so I'll do us a quick favor. I'll run us through the next 3 steps here that they kind of go through, which is the injector current is turned off, the ball of the control plunger reseats, and pressure above the needle increases and pushes the nozzle needle closed.
Think of how much that process is. Every cylinder, every firing order, just the whole 9 yards. Think of how much work this injector does.
Well, that was one of the other pieces here. So the reason that solenoid and piezo-based injectors, and again, common rail injectors, one of the reasons that they work so well, especially for emissions, is that they are able to fire multiple times during a single combustion event.
Yep.
So by the time your actual cylinder goes all the way up and all the way down, your injector is going to fire multiple times. I know in the Cummins world, we used to get requests all the time to turn
pilot off.
Guys didn't want that pilot injection because it smooths out the engine, to be honest with you. So you get a small pilot injection that helps it compress because you're pushing more fuel in there, which is pushing the air, which makes it move a little bit quicker. So that pilot injection really kind of starts the whole combustion cycle much easier and much smoother. And at the time, guys were asking very often for us to turn the pilot off because they wanted it to clatter. Yep. They wanted more noise out of it. So a noise reduction strategy.
Cummins owners, man.
Is I never got it from a Duramax guy. I never had a Duramax guy ask me to make his shit more clattery. But again, these injectors, they work so fast. This event happens so quickly that they're able to do it multiple times within a single combustion cycle. So just think when you talk about RPM, engine rotation speed, that's moving obviously much slower than what each cylinder is moving, right? Each cylinder is moving, I would imagine,
It's a different rate altogether.
So you're getting something where this is lightning fast.
So, we kind of gone over a little bit of this in the beginning of the episode, but, trucks that use common rail injection, or more importantly, a solenoid-based injector would be your 01 to 10 Duramax, and then your 17 plus. So what's weird with the Duramax is they went 01 to 10 with a solenoid injector.
Yeah.
Then they went to the piezo from 11 to 16. Then the L5P comes out. They're like, you know what? We're going to go back to a solenoid-based injector.
Well, they switched suppliers for the first time in a Duramax on the fuel system. So they went from Bosch, which they've always had, and then they went to a Denso.
Yep.
And I think that was a part of that move, going to that Denso controller, going to that Denso fuel system, that Denso ECM, that really rewrote the book.
Yep.
And the L5P, we know, is dramatically different. I know it's still a 6.6 liter, and it still says Duramax on the side.
But everything else is different, man.
Nothing like an LB7 when they first came out.
No.
It's something to remember when you're shopping for trucks. Is clearly, our guys know they're all very different.
Yeah, the Duramax engine, I'd say back in 01, it paved the way, for the other competitors in the space to catch up to. And I would say the L5P, again, man, knowing what we know now about the L5P and its lift pump capabilities, its injection pump capabilities, its injector capabilities, and everything as a whole, it's a different platform than any prior Duramax.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. And the piezo, one thing I thought that was interesting is Bosch is the one that introduced them to the market. Yep. And because the crystal can move so quickly as current is applied to it, or as current is applied to it, they say it can move up to 5 times faster than a standard injector solenoid, and the motion is frictionless. Yep. So anytime we can remove friction, they're going to increase efficiency,
longevity, and things like that.
So it's interesting, like you said, that we went to it. We were there for the longest running RPO. From any Duramax, and then we moved back to it. So these new solenoids from Denso are supposed to be phenomenal. I read a little bit about them. They are supposed to be a next level solenoid and move extremely quicker.
Well, over the next couple of years,
quick.
we'll start to see that.
Yeah.
And then the Cummins, 2003 to present, they've ran a solenoid injector, common rail injection. And then the Power Strokes, they introduced that with the 6.4 back in 08. So, and that's 08 to current with the 6.7s. So.
Absolutely. So we hit on this again just lightly before is atomization, emissions, MPG. These are some of the reasons that they've gone to common rail. One of the other things I think is durability and power output, which I hit on early in the episode here. We watched Ford go through a lot of struggles trying to stay with their old system.
Yeah, the Huey injection and things like that. Yeah.
And it just, I think over time, it just proved that this is the new standard.
Well, I think, technology as a whole, there's a lot of late adopters, early adopters, people see the value, don't see the value.
Yeah.
We're going to have a lot of listeners. Like, listen, we know there's a lot of listeners that are, more mechanical injection based. I was very pro mechanical injection prior to starting here because of the ease, right?
Sure.
But now we look at things and, there's a cost difference. There's a lot of variables, but it is much easier to make the power on a common rail than it is a mechanical injected vehicle.
Right.
Hands down.
Right.
Like,
right.
No comparison.
Well, and I always just think out of the box. If you were going to go buy two trucks and talk about what did my dollar per horsepower buy me, it's really hard to get away from that common rail.
Absolutely.
So, all right, there have been some changes over the years. So I touched on a little bit earlier with the LB7, the ball seats, injectors inside of the head. I know we've talked about that in the past. It's the only RPO or only stretch of Duramaxes where the injectors are actually inside the head, making the job to replace them ridiculous.
What do you mean? It's fun.
The nozzle needles are now DLC coated, so it's a different coating that's going to make them stronger and last longer. So the new ones you're getting are more reliable than the ones that went into the factory.
Yeah, then, LOI, they introduced the injector being outside of the valve cover, which makes every other injector job moving forward a little easier.
Yep.
And one of the issues that they had with those were the 2 and 7 injector harness.
Yeah, man. So, yeah, just first year jitters, I would call it. They only ran that for a year and a half. Yep. And most of them, honestly,
because they still ran a FICM, in those, so they adopted that from the LB7.
Yep. So. And honestly, by this time, most of the ones I've seen have already been replaced.
Oh, of course.
A lot of these guys got caught under warranty where the problem was happening so quickly. So if you have a 150,000 mile and you don't know if it's been done, it's probably been done. Now Cummins has seen some changes over the years as well, Chris. So I know the spray pattern is changing. This is something I think you have a little bit better handle on.
Yeah, so, again, for the Cummins 03, so the early 5.9s, they ran a 7-hole with a 143-degree spray angle or
what
spray
is that?
pattern.
Can you try to describe that for the listeners a little bit?
So basically, you have the hole in the nozzle, and those holes are set at a specific angle in the nozzle itself, and it's going to disperse fuel or spray fuel into the cylinder. So that spray angle is where, at top dead center or wherever that piston lies, where that fuel is going to spray.
Gotcha. Okay.
What was really odd to me is, so they go to the late 5.9 now, granted emission standards. Okay. They go to a 5-hole with a 128-degree pattern, and the idea there was to help for a cleaner atomization in the cylinder.
Gotcha. So the more we can break up that liquid into a mist, which is what atomization is, it's going to, again, we're going to get a more efficient burn, right?
What's really common in the aftermarket, guys will, the big fad years ago was, I want the late 5.9 motor piston, but I want the early spray pattern. And there was all these myths and ideas that the truck could make more power, run cleaner. These. Honestly, we've seen trucks come in both ways. They realistically make similar power. There might be other tuners out there, other gurus that say, hey, you know what, this is the route we like to go. That's awesome. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying if you have 100 over from an early 5.9 versus a late 5.9 and a late 5.9 motor, they're going to make similar power, and that's that.
Yeah.
So that's just my opinion. It is what it is. Again, I've seen it both ways.
I don't mind calling it out. I think it is a reluctancy to change.
And I think, I've had customers, I've had dealers call in having issues with a truck, and they, long story short, when it comes down to it, they had late injectors in an early motor. Can't do that. They're going to be very smoky because you're not getting the spray angle in the piston, or tuners not being able to calibrate accordingly with like a new injector and an old injector and a new style 5.9 motor. So be careful with that. I think where you're going to see the biggest hang up is going to be your 04 crowd. If it's a high output, you have a late 5.9, or if you have a standard output, that's an early 5.9. So that 04 break period, those guys are going to have to be a little bit more cautious.
Yeah.
And then what's really odd to me, or what's a little surprising, is the 5.9s, they do this spray spray pattern or spray angle change. Granted, there wasn't an emissions tier that they needed to fulfill, which is why they did that. But then in the 6.7 world, they've all been an 8-hole, 146-degree spray angle.
Yeah.
So from 07.5 to current, the nozzles has changed. There's been very slight change in that.
Right.
But the spray angle and the whole design hasn't.
Well, what's odd to me, so you went 7-hole, 143. Mm-hmm. Then you drop the holes and you change the angle a little bit to be a little bit less abrupt. So I'd imagine in my head that's about balancing that pressure coming through that nozzle.
But you also have to keep in mind that when they went to the 8-hole 146, they up pressure.
Right. So you up the pressure and then you go back to very similar to your early 5.9s. So it is just interesting what kind of some of these balances are, right? Because we're also dealing with a larger displacement motor. We're dealing with different boosts. We're dealing with different everything.
Technology, and injector control and things like that. There's not as much control in an early 5.9 as a late 5.9, and there's not as much control as a 6.7 is concerned. So you kind of have that going into the mix, but I mean, in the like I said, going back to the pressure, injection pressure on a 5.9 is about 23,000. They up the ante to 26 and change on a 6.7. I mean, 3,000 psi of pressure, 4,000 psi of pressure. That's a lot of pressure difference.
Sure.
Look at a Duramax. LB7s 23, 24, LBZs 26, and then LMLs are 29,000 out of the gate.
Stock.
So it's just crazy to see, how that has evolved over the years. So,
absolutely.
And why don't you start off with the power stroke stuff?
Let's do it. So we know
what we're experts in right now.
We know our most passionate fans drive 6.4s. Everybody knows this. Really, we're not 6.4 experts. We're not going to pretend to be. So all I can say on the 6.4 injectors is there's a lot of performance injectors that are available from a number of sources. And I say that with a shrug on my shoulders because I know that it's true. If somebody was going to ask me about a 6.4, I'd refer them over to a guy like J.D. Gleason, who is an expert on that field.
Well, I mean, they're also like an oddball because they have a different style injection pump, the injector style. Like, there's a lot of differences. But again, the 6.4 was the introduction of the high-pressure common rail injection off of a long span of Huey injection.
Right.
So, that was they made their
on
mark.
paper. I love the 6.4.
Yeah, no, they're one of the most advanced motors of its time. Compounded turbocharger, common rail injection out of the factory.
Great trans.
Interior nasty, exterior
phenomenal.
Nasty,
phenomenal.
Like, beautiful truck.
Wholeheartedly agree.
I'm not going to say my opinion.
Right.
They're good trucks, man.
I understand.
But then it paved the way.
I don't agree, but I understand.
But then it paved the way.
It did pave the way. For now, 6.7, and I'm not trying to start like a Ford Duramax thing here, but a 6.7 engine is really similar to a Duramax.
Fuel system-wise, turbocharger-wise, there are a lot of similarients there. ECM control.
Hard to get away from that, right? They're buying from the same sources, guys.
So, like the LML.
Yep.
Okay. A 6.7 has a CP4 and a similar injector.
Yep.
So, hit it.
I mean, you pretty much wrapped it up. I mean, really, performance CP 4.2s, you can get them from Exergy. They're good at like 900 horse on a 6.7, which is insane to me. The product lineup from Exergy is like the same from 20% over to 300% over between a Power Stroke and a Duramax. So like when we say that engine is really similar to a Duramax, I mean, it's like really similar to a Duramax from a fuel system standpoint. Man, Chris, I have been waiting to do this episode because we actually, I scrambled and I tried to research this, I think a week or 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago.
Before the holiday.
So I spent like a whole day reading all of this stuff about injectors and all this stuff that I had no idea of. Guys, I can't say or stress enough, go check out the resources, man. If any of this is something that tickles your fancy, definitely fire up the old Google machine and look it up. There really is super interesting, much more in-depth information out there.
Yeah, no, and of course, if you have questions, you can go on our Facebook group, ask away. If you want to email myself or Paul, we would be glad to help.
Yeah.
If you guys have other requests for episodes, please, not a 6.9 or a 7.3 IDI, just anything but that, please. So if you guys have recommendations, feel free to shoot them over. We would definitely be very receptive in doing some research and becoming more knowledgeable on a topic that you guys want to listen to.
That's right.
Please just reach out and let us know.
Join our Facebook group if you haven't already, guys.
What's it called now?
It's Paul Loves the Power Stoke.
Power
The 6L Power Stoke.
Okay, so we're
Something
probably,
like that.
We're probably going to rename that soon.
So I didn't realize when I named it that you can't rename it for like 28 days or 30 days
You're
or whatever.
kidding.
No, for real.
That
Had no
sucks.
idea.
Wow.
So we're locked into that, I think, until December 11th.
We're not counting, though.
I've posted on the group, to be clear, any confusion here. We've never changed the name of our podcast. It has always been Diesel Performance Podcast. It always will be. The thing we have and will continue to change is the name of the group. Just for fun.
Yeah.
It's really for our listeners. We figure you guys know it. You know how to find it. Go to our Facebook page, Diesel Performance Podcast, Facebook page, and find the only group that's linked to it. It'll be real easy to find. But yeah, we'll continue to change that name. Right now, we're floating around the name Diesel Talk. What do you think for the group?
That's a good one. I think that's a good one. You know, I think that cross-references and adopts the Diesel Performance Podcast a lot better.
Yeah.
Not Paul loves the six stroke or whatever the fuck it is.
Right, yeah.
Just, guys, what the fuck? I love giving Paul shit. I mean, everyone that listens to us, we all know that I am the...
Well, I'm well known. I'm well known
the
throughout the
6-liter
universe
world. Yeah.
for being a huge 6-liter fan and for being awesome at spell checking. It turns out
Kill bet.
I really proved it this time.
So the stroke wasn't an intentional typo. Just admit it.
Yeah. So like I said, once I realized you can't change the name like 3 minutes after I posted it, and I looked at it and was like, oh shit.
I mean, that's not even the most embarrassing thing that probably one of us have done today.
No,
so
not even close.
I mean, it is what it is.
Yep.
I mean, how much ammo do you have on me for embarrassing shit on air in all the prior episodes over the last few years?
I don't even have to bring it up. It's all recorded and published. It's out there in the podcast
in the
verse.
interweb space.
Yeah, it's on the line.
Cool.
All right, man. Well, hey, guys, thank you so much for listening. Like we said, hit us up. Let us know if we can help you with anything. For today, this has been Paul.
And Chris.
Have a great day.
I don't know what the fuck they're talking about.